you, Joanna. I'm actually really excited for this because I get to introduce my good friend Zach Minuto. Zach used to play bass for my band The Heavens, and we've spent a lot of time talking, a lot of time playing music. So this is this is well explored territory for Zach and I, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to hear from Zach and encounter his new work, which is really exciting. So without further ado, Zach, do you want to take over?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks to Joanna for having me, and Jack and Julia for helping put this on, and to William for being here as well. I can't wait to hear what he has to say, and to the US Embassy for putting this on. So I'll get started. My name is Zach. In my spare time, I build guitars, and I'm sort of a hobbyist musician, but this is a practice that I've been doing for close to about 10 years now. And in that time, I've completed 4 guitars, and I have a lot more that are currently in progress. So I'll talk a little bit about my process and why I do it and what I've learned and everything. So I'll start with a quote. This is from an LCD Sound System song, and it just kind of illustrates to me how guitars always are coming into and out of and back into style. So he talks about somebody's band. I hear you and your band have sold your guitars and bought turntables. I hear that you and your band have sold your turntables and bought guitars. So these things, even just in the course of my time from a teenager to now being interested in music, the electric guitar sort of had its own life cycle and come in and out of style. So it's something that I think has a sort of everlasting, like permanent seat at the musical table. But specifically for me, electric guitars um, are such a fascinating instrument because you take a really minute physical act. You pluck a string, and when the guitar's unplugged, it's almost inaudible. But through electricity, magnification, amplification, it transmutes the sound into something completely different. And there's like so much alchemy that happens in that space that I really wanted to explore. Um, it's highly expressive of the quirks and the ticks of the human player. So everyone's finger makes a different sound on the string. Everyone's style is very different. And so you hand the same instrument to a different player, and you get radically different sounds out of it. It's something that you don't really get with, say, a synthesizer. Um, and aside from just like how the guitar works, that I found really fascinating, uh, the instrument has taken on like a mythological status in popular culture, and it's been there for so many important moments in music history, and its meaning has shifted through the years in such a way. There's a really robust and long tradition that I wanted to sort of contribute my small piece to. And so for me, I think they exist about as much as a fashion object or a visual arts object as they do a musical instrument. And I think that duality is really interesting. Um, for me, as somebody who grew up in the 90s and kind of doesn't know a world before like Black Sabbath, say, the guitar is as much used for making noise as it is for actual like euphonic music. And something that I really enjoy doing is just like running feedback or running lots of noise through the pickups, and just kind of exploring the space that way. So that's another capability that you have with a guitar that you wouldn't get, say, even with a bass or with other electronic instruments. Um, and then lastly, I think there's just like an affective sort of magnetism that these things hold over people. You just kind of want to play it. So I grew up playing cello. Um, as somebody looked from afar at guitars, it was kind of um, like fascinating to me how you can make all these really cool sounds. And my first instrument that I made, I was kind of curious, and I kind of just thought it would be a lot easier than it ended up being. So I bit off this whole project. I had no idea what I was doing and just kind of stumbled my way through it. But at the end, I did have a playable instrument, and that just kind of kept me coming back. Building a guitar sits at the intersection of craft and art. So as much as it is a visual arts process of decorating the thing and making sure it looks interesting and trying to express something with the design, you have to do a lot of sanding and you have to do a lot of measuring and getting the angle of the neck right. and making sure everything fits together. So it's about as much carpentry as it is visual art, and that balance is something that's really been difficult to strike, but it's an ongoing process. For me, I'm somebody who doesn't spend very long periods of time working on one thing, and I always like that when you build an instrument, you can do, you can tighten two screws in it and walk away, and you come back, and the thing is still sitting there waiting for you to keep working on it. It's not um, a digital project that you have to keep moving across different platforms or something. It's just always right there, and it's a tangible thing that you can interact with your hands. Um, and then when you're done with the project, it's a fully functional instrument that you can play indefinitely. And so it's never really over. You never really finish the relationship with the project unless you give it to somebody else, and then they have the thing to play. So my first sort of click that happened in my head as a teenager, I was learning cello. I was taking lessons, and I was asking my teacher, why did Johann Sebastian Bach make the suites so difficult to play, and why does the range go up so high up the instrument? And my teacher told me he actually got bored of playing a four-string cello, and so he created his own instrument called the violoncello da spalla, and this had a fifth string that allowed you to go much higher up the musical register. So you can play all these notes that were otherwise pretty inaccessible on a four-string cello. And then later in the 20th century, cellists had reverse engineered this to become possible on a four-string cello. But to me, I noticed like there's this thing that you can do as a musician where rather than confine yourself to what the instrument can do, if you have compositional ideas, you can create an instrument to suit that. And so that kind of freed me from the confines of what a regular instrument was capable of doing. And it kind of made me think like, well, I could potentially make something myself if the need arises. So that kind of was the first bit of inspiration. The second bit of inspiration was when I was also a teenager. I think I was at like a Hard Rock cafe, and they had a vault, and somebody took me back into the vault and showed me Kurt Cobain's Jaguar. Now, this person died when I was about 4 years old, and I didn't get into his music until about 10 years after that. But I picked up the guitar and I found this person created so much influential music that changed the face of rock and roll, and I'm holding the thing that that he played it on. And to me, it was a sort of relic. Um, as somebody grew up Catholic, I think like objects can be bestowed with a sort of like sacred meaning. And to me, in like a modern day rock and roll tradition rather than a religious tradition, this was a sort of relic to me. And that had this another point of inspiration where the things that we make music on are as much a part of the tradition and carry on that tradition in a very similar way that people or knowledge is transmuted. And in fact, a lot of guitar heroes will say, "Oh, my first guitar I got at a thrift shop, or somebody gave it to me, or something." So the instruments themselves are just as integral for passing on the tradition as the knowledge or the taking lessons and that sort of thing. Lastly, when I was a teenager, my friends had like a my friend's house had a detached basement. We could make a lot of noise down there, so everyone just kind of brought their instruments over. We started forming bands. We started playing together, and a lot of these bands are still active right now. If you go to practiceroomrecords.com, you can hear all of it for free. Some of it's really good. Um, but it was our own little scene, and I started noticing that the instruments kind of lived in the space and traveled in their own like autonomous trajectories from different members and from one band to the next. The drum set was sort of like shared property, and I realized like, oh, if you have a thing and you bring it into a space, it kind of takes on the space takes on ownership of that thing, and the instrument itself will take on its own sort of its own life and its own trajectory, and kind of become an autonomous member of that space as well as any other band member. So that was another point of inspiration for me, and that DIY ethic sort of shows up in my work now. Um, Lastly, while I was living in New York City, the Met did an exhibit on famous rock and roll instruments, and that to me signified like, oh, people really care about what you're doing. Not me personally, but this tradition is really important, and it's made it to the highest and kind of most like establishment place of recognition in the art world. So I sort of started thinking about it in terms of visual art as well as just kind of something that I enjoyed doing on my own. And so I started going through that archive and learning more about the instruments and the tradition. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. I just want to point out a couple of guitars that I thought were interesting and have a cool history and that were influential to me and that I've learned more about in quarantine, as I haven't been building as much and just sort of taken more of like an, I guess, educational approach to my work. So we'll start with Woody Guthrie. Um, this machine kills fascists. It's a very famous slogan, and he used to write it on his guitars. But for me, this shows like there's a belief at work here that I think carries on in a lot of circles modern day, that playing music and that the instrument of the guitar has repercussions that make ripple effects in the political sphere. So it's not just that you're playing music to a room, but that by doing so, you're impacting the world outside of that room. This isn't just sort of like a nice little thought that he had. This is something that he wrote on his guitar during World War II. So the US was literally fighting fascists. So I don't know. It's this belief that the guitar has real tangible impact on the world around it. And I think that belief still continues today. But talking about electric guitars, I want to start with Sister Rosetta Tharpe. A lot of music historians will point to this one gospel singer as sort of the flashpoint where rock and roll diverged a bit from Mississippi blues, Delta blues, and from gospel music. So you see here, she's pictured with her white Gibson SG, or cream colored rather, Gibson SG. She's got these three big, mean looking pickups on it. She's making a lot of twang. She had a tremolo bar, so she's really pushing the limits of the instrument. And she kind of was known for throwing a lot of like crunch and fuzz and grit onto her music. And she played gospel music. She sang about the Lord and everything, but she's playing this guitar that kind of had devil horns. And there's just a little bit of like duality going on with that. But you know, it matches her coat. And here it's very much a fashion item. So as early as rock and roll history goes, you see the guitar being worn as an accessory as well as an instrument. Two very famous blues guitars. You have B.B. King's Lucille, which is something that he's had his entire career. He's had many different Lucilles, but it's usually a black Gibson hollow body guitar, gold hardware. And it's called Lucille because one night he had to go into a venue and save it from a fire. And the fire was started by two men who were arguing over a woman named Lucille. So he named the guitar Lucille. There have been many since the first one that he saved from the fire, and it's been reissued a number of times by Gibson. On the right is Bo Diddley. Bo Diddley had a guitar called the Twang Machine, and this was first actually a cigar box guitar. He used to play cigar boxes, and then when he got famous, made his own instruments or had them made for him, Gretsch made a cigar box shaped electric guitar. So again, his brand, but also his sound is instantiated in the shape of the guitar. And again, they still sell these. When Eddie Van Halen passed away last year, a lot of people were posting pictures of his guitar and that pattern, which was on all of his guitars. The Frankenstrat's a very famous guitar, not only because of the person who played it, but because it was kind of cobbled together from all these different parts. So he had a neck that was put onto a body that was from a different guitar, and he had these really hot pickups wired into it. But most famously, he had this very distinct paint job, and the paint job became like his branding. And you see on the right, especially, it kind of blends into his clothing. So there's this erasure of the distinction between the person playing the instrument and the instrument itself, which is kind of how people perceived Eddie and his guitar. And I remember seeing YouTube video comments of him like playing the solo from Eruption. People are like, oh, he needs to be buried with this guitar. It's a part of his soul. So there is this mythological connection visually as well as sonically from the person to the instrument and back and forth. A more recent example, St. Vincent, one of my favorite musicians, released her own line of guitars, and the guitar typically, at least in the majority of the 20th century, was like a very male image. You can talk about sort of the phallic implications of someone playing it like from the crotch, but she designed a guitar with an hourglass figure, and she said in the first press release, this is ergonomically designed to be comfortable for women. She said, I think the quote was, "There's room for a boob or two." Maybe paraphrasing, but it's the idea is that it's comfortable for women to play as well, and that she's making the instrument not just accessible but appealing to women who might have otherwise felt alienated by the hyper macho image of the latter generations of guitar gods. And she's pictured on the left playing it on SNL. There's a whole line of colors, and this only came out a couple of years ago, but already it's sort of entered the canon, I think, of like notable and distinctive guitar shapes and styles. So here, this is the last kind of historical slide I'll go through. Three very famous guitar gods, say, and they're playing three very different instruments. On the left, Springsteen's Telecaster looks very road worn, right? It looks like, you know, he's a working class hero, so the guitar is also a working class hero. It's American manufactured. The paint's worn through, so it's been on the road for years. It looks like he plays it every single night, and he just loves the heck out of it. On the right, Prince has the Prince logo shape in the like the body is shaped like Prince, so it doesn't even look like a guitar. It looks like something totally his own that he's since, you know, he made his logo his name basically, and even the guitar he won't play somebody else's guitar. Everything has got to be his thing, and it really embodies his ethos as a musician. The middle is Jimmy Page, and he's presumably playing Stairway to Heaven. So he would bring out the double neck SG specifically to play Stairway to Heaven, and the guitar sort of conferred this like mystical aura, because when you saw the guitar tech bring that out on stage, it meant that he was going to play this very special song that had its own place in the canon. And there's all, you know, the Wayne's World bit about no Stairway to Heaven in the guitar store. Like the song is carried on through the years as being this like flat, like this one high point for rock and roll, and the fact that it's confined to this one guitar that he plays just sort of further encapsulates that and makes that real on stage. And then, so these are all hand painted guitars, and this is kind of where I found a little more inspiration. So on the right is a hand painted Flying V that Jimi Hendrix owned. This was recovered with a lot of the paint stripped off, and they've since restored it, and this was in the Met. But yeah, so the point is, even going back to the 60s, you know, musicians were painting their own guitars and decorating them, and it wasn't just the factory paint that they would use, but they would kind of make their own designs. The top left is Eric Clapton. Forgetting the name, these all have like names, but this one he played when he was in Cream. And then the one below that is Jimmy Page's Dragon guitar that he played on the first Led Zeppelin album, and he played with the Yardbirds. These have all since been like recreated and even reissued for general sale. So it's, even though those musicians didn't actually own those individual guitars, people like the design and they want to sort of mimic their idols. And so the visual design confers that as much as the actual guitar, the sound itself does. So now I'll show you some of my work. We'll start with my favorite. This is the first one that I completed for myself. Still the one that I use most of the time. And I wanted to do something that would let the natural color of the wood come through. So I just did like a natural stain on the wood, and I covered up parts of it with painter's tape before I did the black and white. So you can still see the natural wood showing through. I wanted to play a semi-hollow guitar. I like the lower lows, the more hollow sound you get out of it, the brighter, twangier kind of things you get on the upper strings. But then I also like that it catches a lot of feedback, and I like making a lot of noise with it, because even though it has the two humbuckers to cut out some of the extra noise and the extra feedback, being a hollow body or semi-hollow guitar, when the sound bounces around the room, it does get caught back up in the body of the guitar and fed back through the pickups again, which is really fun if you can just crank up the amp and make tons of noise and just see what comes out of it. So that's something that I've enjoyed playing around with. But designing the guitar, as you see, there's a lot of hardware on it. So I had to think through what's going to fit on this thing. And I wanted to do a tree. I thought, you know, the snowfall is kind of like a nice image for me. But I had to figure out a way to keep it to the periphery of the body of the guitar, because if I put it right in the middle, the pickups and the strings would get in the way. Um, so this next one is Gemma. I built it for my sister. She named it. She said she's bougie like that, so she gave her a name. And she plays more like indie rock, classic rock. Um, so I wanted to make her something that fit the style. I kind of I kind of messed up the paint job. Let's just say it was supposed to be like black around the sides with maybe a black pinstripe, and I'm not the neatest worker, so that very quickly changed. And I did a really sort of like rough, kind of almost like hacked together brush strokes across the guitar. But then I wanted to complement it with a really shiny finish to maintain the yeah, I guess the gloss and the sort of like glam of the instrument. She likes olive branches a lot. She's, you know, her next tattoo is going to be an olive branch tattoo. So I wanted to incorporate on the body of the guitar the olive branch images, and I just did that with copper um, shielding tape. So the same copper you put under the pickups to cut out feedback or noise. I took a little more of it and I cut out these olive branches and put it on, and then painted a little over and covered it with the clear coat, so it does shine a lot more and it really catches the light kind of nicely. And if she does play it on stage, it's, you know, there's stage lights that'll be something to take into account also. But even just sitting in the, you know, in the living room, it catches the light kind of in an interesting way. This is a commission I did for my friend Vince. This is in his possession right now, so this is a picture I just snapped real quick to send to him. But this started off with sort of like a Jackson Pollock type splatter that I did. And then when I hung it up to dry, I hung it vertically and it all just kind of melted down the front of it. So Vince and I used to play in high school. We played a lot of like heavier, kind of deeper metal riffs, or like even hardcore punk, that sort of thing. And I always think of him as somebody who like shreds and he likes to melt faces. So I wanted to make this like face melting paint job on his guitar, even though this is just, you know, it's a Telecaster. It's a lot more versatile than that. But again, the paint job I want and the design to reflect the player. So since this was made for somebody, I had this thing in mind for him. And you know, on the neck, or sorry, the headstock, you can see it's got that same kind of splatter job, but then the body of it really runs a lot more and it melts together. This I did not do. This art is a collaboration with my friend Sam. I was getting a tattoo from her. She's back at my home on Long Island, and so I was getting a tattoo, and she was showing me some of her other work and her flash book and everything. And I thought it would be cool to sort of combine the tattoo art tradition with electric guitars, and sort of give the body of the guitar its own tattoos, which is like this really cheesy pun, but I don't know, it works for me. So I just gave her the body of the guitar. I said, do whatever you want. And she came up with this like nautical theme. But again, since when you look at a guitar, you're looking usually from a bit of a distance. You're seeing it on stage or you're seeing it across the room. She did a really great job of embellishing the wood grain on the guitar. So that's actually kind of hand painted and embellished by hand. But yeah, the art is this very classic kind of nautical style, mermaids, fish, and and some flowers. So in order to match that, I wanted to distress the wood as much as possible, and kind of give it like a driftwood type appearance. So I painted it black. I sanded almost all the paint off, so you really get a lot more of that grain. It looks a little more weathered, and these are some more close-ups of the fish and the mermaid's tail. So this currently doesn't have an owner. Just putting the finishing touches on it, and then we'll probably put it up for sale in her shop or online. And so yeah, I'll just close with a couple quick takeaways that I've learned from this process. Again, usually the painting is reflective of the player that it's intended for, except in the case where I don't have anyone in mind, which is the last guitar. I don't actually, I want to make this very clear. Like, I don't build from scratch. I'm buying parts, I'm buying pieces that are already almost like, you know, pre-cut or pre-assembled, or you know, the neck, I'm not sitting there putting each fret on the fretboard. That's very precise work. But that said, there still is a lot of work that goes into it. You have to make sure everything fits together properly. There's a lot of sanding and a lot of fine tuning and a lot of making sure the holes are cut right and everything fits together the right way. Because if the neck is off by a fraction of a degree, it'll mess up all the playability of the guitar. So things like that, you really have to take a lot of time to get right. Um, Also, you have to paint the whole entire thing before you piece it together because otherwise it just won't. Um, you won't be able to paint it afterward. So it's a very careful process of having to make sure that you don't scuff the paint or you don't scratch anything while you're putting the pickups on or wiring the thing. But yeah, I wanted these to look very DIY. I want these not to mimic a manufactured guitar. I don't want this to look like, oh, I made another Fender. Um, I want this to look like something that you can't really get anywhere else, and that looks like your friend made it for you, or that someone that like hand painted it. I'm always surprised when I plug in a finished guitar. You kind of have an idea of what it's going to sound like when you're working on it for months and months, and then you finally plug it in, and it's this totally other thing, and you're like, oh, this is its own thing. It's its own separate entity that you have to have an interaction with as the player. And Yeah, I don't know. I don't usually stress over like, oh, which is the exact right pickups, or should I upgrade the tuners or something like. Um, if the player wants all of that, I'm glad to do it, but usually I don't like really geek out over the specific parts. Um, but yeah, this is a really important practice to me, especially during the pandemic, because objects are where we store memories, and that's not just to go for like muscle memory and playing music, where um, the memory of how to play a song is stored in your fingers and in your hands. Um, but just looking at a thing, you'll see like when you go through, like your closet and you find an old piece of memorabilia or something that you remember things from. Um, we store memories in things rather. So having an instrument that you not only learn to play, but you take to your friend's house to play in bands with, or you play a show with, or you take on the road with you, all of those memories get stored in that thing. So again, they're bestowed with a really long lifespan and long list of memories. In the pandemic, since we're not going to shows, continuing to work on these guitars for me is a way to um, continue to contribute to that memory making. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a whole lot more to say than that, but I'll be glad to take more questions. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much, Zach.
I hope
All
that wasn't too like jumbled, but yeah.
wherever we are, let's give a round of applause even for Zach.
Yes, thank you so much, Zach. That was fantastic.
Thanks again for having me.
So I do have some man, I'm they say like blown away. I'm pretty blown away. I look at my questions and I think, oh gosh, is this even gonna do justice to the work that we just saw? And I love that you took us into the history. I said in the chat, I'm glad you mentioned Jimmy Page's Telecaster. That was fun.
Mhm.
And it was cool you began that history with one of the first ones was Sister Rosetta Tharpe,
Yeah.
which was the SG, and then you ended it with Jimmy Page's double neck SG.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I was very happy because my SG is sitting. My just
Yeah.
wanted to say that he was thankful to be featured in such a way.
Mhm.
Yeah, my just one comment before I start asking your questions. You mentioned growing up Catholic, so I
Mhm.
know you'll know this reference. And Zach also has you also have a deep religious background and theological and philosophical background, and I know that a lot of that goes into your creative work as well. And it made me think. This whole presentation made me think of the psalm where it says that God made we are fearfully and wonderfully made by God. Humans are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I just the whole time I
Mhm.
was like, these guitars are fearfully and wonderfully made. It's like such precise, careful, intricate work. and it's also so beautiful and artistic and expressive, and I love how central that is for you, the that it be a personal expression. And I think if we're exploring architecture and music, that the architecture, any architecture and music will always have this kind of like personal expressive element to it, because that's how deeply personal music is. So thank you for that. This was very exciting. I loved watching that. Some questions, some of these you answered, but I don't remember uh, if or maybe I forgot it, or maybe I missed it while I was, you know, lost in my wonderment. But when did you first start playing guitar? Like,
So I picked up my first guitar. I was probably 16 or so. It was relatively late, I think, for somebody starting to play as a teenager. But I started with an acoustic electric. So I was mostly just learning chords and very basic songs. Um, and then I actually haven't ever bought an electric guitar. I've only made them. So my first electric that I owned was this guy right here. This is the first one that I made. And actually, I shouldn't say that. My partner Julianne reminded me, when I was in college, I did put together like it was, another double neck SG, and it was because I was like, I want to have a double neck guitar. It's so cool. And I put it together. I played it for maybe a couple months, and it really wasn't well built. So I took it back apart, and it's still in pieces in the other room right now, which is, it's currently a back burner project. But yeah, the first one that I finished and that worked was my own electric guitar, and that one was probably when I was about 22, 23 years old. So it's something that I've very slowly learned over the years, and I'm not by any means like good at guitar or like a virtuoso, but it's something that I've picked up and kind of worked through as I've learned to make the instruments. I've also learned to play it.
and that in itself is interesting, that you don't just, play the guitar for a decade and then start thinking like, oh, I wonder if I built it. Like, you kind of grew in both your appreciation for the guitar artistically, and in a desire to engage it on like a deeper constructive level, as well as, musically you're learning how to play it. Like, that's cool to me that both of those things are happening at the same time.
Yeah. I'm like that with a lot of things. Like I started brewing my own beer as soon as I was old enough to drink it. During the pandemic, we've all been baking bread and everything, but I really like to get my hands dirty and learn how to cook and make my own food and grow my own food and everything. So it's just in keeping with kind of how I like to live my life generally, is like you just dive straight in and learn as much as possible by doing the thing, and that makes you appreciate the end result a lot more.
Yeah. So here's kind of a more I do realize all of my questions, except for two that I had written down, were answered by your presentation. Like, what are some of your favorite guitars and why? And what inspired you to want to build guitars? Like these like very
I'll
obvious.
answer those again.
Um, one question I have for you that goes a little, I guess, it more into um, a kind of present history state, and that is, where do you see guitars going in an increasingly digital world? Because I know
Sure.
I've seen now they're coming up with a guitar that you can, it's like a, how they have MIDI keyboards. Well, there's
Yeah.
like a MIDI guitar now where you can actually take, it's an entirely it's hardware, but it's an entirely MIDI instrument
Yeah.
for software instruments.
Yeah. So
So
rather
like,
than just sending the sound into like an amplifier into your computer, it transmutes the notes you're playing into digital signals, and it
right.
sends the code into the computer, and the computer plays from a software instrument what you're playing with your fingers.
And
That's actually been around like probably close to 15 years by now. They're just getting better and better.
right.
Um, But
yeah, and the software instruments now are emulating vintage instruments, so they're
right,
starting to emulate. I mean, even this Marshall amp I have is a digital amp that
right,
includes all this kind of software of these emulators, like that are supposed to mimic the sounds of these vintage guitars. And then also with this new technology, you can play other instruments in the
with a
style,
guitar.
yeah, with the so you can
Yeah.
like bend strings on a piano, and so anyway, I just want to get your thoughts on are guitars going away? Are we gonna lose the guitar solo? Or what's happening?
I mean, I hope not. I think eventually, if you wait long enough, it'll evolve into something else that will occupy the space. I mean, in the same way that like the violin was kind of phased out for the guitar between the, say, like 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century. Like these things on a centuries long scale, eventually, sure, it'll become something else, if not completely vanish. But I think that being in the room with an analog instrument, um, for a human body and like a human played instrument, there's something that really connects us, and there's something affective about that we feed off of. And I like going to really loud shows, and I like going to see metal bands and drone music and all of that. And when sound hits you physically, it has a different effect on the body than if you just listen in your headphones or something. And I think that it really carries that much more if it's an analog instrument and it's coming straight out through speakers. You can achieve something like that digitally, sure, but it is a different sensation. And I think as humans, we'll ultimately want to get back to that. Separate from that, I think we also have this very like tight cycle of nostalgia where already the 90s and early 2000s, people are like nostalgic for that. So as long as we have nostalgia, we'll have people wanting to play vintage instruments and everything. I mean, Jack White was putting out like, blues music basically in the 21st century. There always will be people in the mainstream that are keeping these traditions explicitly alive and referencing them explicitly. So I think music is something that goes through fashion cycles just like anything else, and to that extent we'll just keep seeing it pop back up over and over again in different iterations. But 20 years from now, people will be nostalgic for St. Vincent's classic guitar that to us is very new and fresh right now.
Thank you. A question from the chat: do you think that increasing technology takes away from the guitar's physical sentimental value? I saw there's this invention that creates guitar sounds via gloves. It quote unquote plays the fingerings.
Yeah, I think that's something new. I don't know that it necessarily takes away from it, but I don't think it replaces it either. So as a player, you can put the gloves on and play a guitar, or you can, as Jackie were saying, these MIDI instruments, you can play a MIDI guitar solo and have it come out sounding like chimes, even though you're playing it on a guitar. These things will keep popping up, but I think they'll keep adding, and it'll be this additional thing that doesn't necessarily supersede or replace the guitar. It'll be something separate from it, and to that extent, I think it'll still be important to people down the road. But I don't know. There's like I said, there's something mythological about the guitar, and because we didn't have these things back when the canon was sort of becoming solidified, and because rock and roll as a genre has so much history to it, people are gonna, I think, always want to get back to basics and get back to the physical, tangible instruments.
Thank you. I see a couple hands raised. Debbie, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yes. Oh, you need to mute yourself. Here we go.
Oh, that's a cool feedback.
Sorry, we're in the same room.
Got the tape
First of all,
delay.
thank you so much for that presentation. It was awesome. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
If you could build a guitar and like, design a guitar for any musician that you admire, living or dead, who would it be and like why? Have you ever had those thoughts?
Yeah, that's tough. I think about that not a whole lot, but it has crossed my mind. And I mentioned them, I think, at the very start. I don't know if people were online, but one of my favorite bands, and the band that really pushed me to get into guitar originally, is a band called Rat-a-tat, and they play almost like Baroque sounding, like classical type music, but on modern electric instrumentation. So the guitarist from that is one of my favorite guitarists, and he plays these really cool, like they almost sound like cello or violin solos, like a concerto. And he'll play it over like a hip hop beat or something. So that'd be a fun person to design a guitar for. He plays an Epiphone Wilshire, which is this really like squat bodied kind of wide thing with the two little points. So it's almost like an SG, but like a little more sleek and a little more modern. So that'd be a fun style. I've never built one of those before. But also he's somebody who really pushed me to get into playing guitar. But good question. Yeah, thank you.
And Joanna, I think your hand is also raised.
Yes, thank you. One question I just am excited to ask all of our speakers is just, what's like one piece of advice that you would give to fellow artists, whether that be musicians or artists, like visual artists, designers, or what have you, during this time with the pandemic? What's something that you've learned or a piece of advice that you would have for them?
Mm-hmm. So something that I've learned during the pandemic is that staring at a project is a really bad way of becoming enthusiastic about working on it. So for a while, I had my guitar stuff out on the table. I had an instrument in sort of various states of disrepair and maintenance. And just having it out all the time, it became a piece of furniture more than a creative project. So I think don't be afraid to like put the thing away for a little while, go for a walk, get outside, do something else, read a book. And then when you want to come back to it, you'll come back to it and you'll be fresh and re-energized that way, rather than just, leaving the thing out and staring at it forever.
That is great advice, Zach. Thank you. I am mindful of the time, but I do want to give you a chance to speak to the Bandcamp link that has been shared in the chat. You just came out with some music this week. Do you want to tell us about it?
I did, yeah. So this is the first song on what I was calling an EP. I guess it's going to probably become more of an album by now. I'm hoping to have the whole thing out sometime in the fall. I think the tentative date I have on there is like October. But it's going to be an instrumental, kind of like post-rock project. You can hear the first song. It's very repetitive, kind of very meditative. And yeah, it's something, I don't know. I've been listening to a lot of like Godspeed You Black Emperor and that sort of thing. A lot of instrumental music, and it's something that I can, again, come back to every once in a while, lay down new tracks for. But it's, I don't know. There's been this music in me for a while, and with all of the noise of the pandemic, I think it's really hard to focus on. But now, I don't know. I'm vaccinated. A lot of my friends are vaccinated. Things are kind of starting, hopefully, to turn a bit of a corner. So I'm finding I have a little bit more mental capacity to sit down and work on this in my spare time. But yeah, I think the whole album is going to be instrumental with maybe a bit of like spoken word or field recordings over it. And yeah, it's a meditation first and foremost.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. If you have any more questions for Zach, throw them in the chat now. We have another question here from Matt Barden. Do you see yourself going into a different avenue in the next few years? Like, do you see yourself exploring another idea or art form that you can interject into your way of art or design?
That's a good question. Thank you, Matt, for that. I think it'd be nice to learn really how to draw, or get a little bit better at just the visual art side of things. I'm not somebody who has a lot of background in that, so it would be fun to learn. I think, I took like one drawing class recently with my girlfriend, and it was fun. I found I had a bit of a knack for it, but I could see just doing straight visual art for a little bit at some point, and again, just mostly for my own enjoyment and edification. Um, and yeah, I don't know how much longer I'll be doing guitars. There might be something else that comes up or that I find more interesting. So the future is a blank slate right now.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again for truly an incredibly multifaceted and edifying discussion. It's been absolutely lovely to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much, Zach. That was great.
So now we will have a 5-minute break, and then we will hear from Professor Tate. And this is also very exciting on our theme, exploring architecture in music. So get a stretch, have a drink, maybe a snack, and come back in 5 minutes.
Jack, maybe while we're waiting, you're probably already doing this, but we could have some of Zach's music. Ah, great minds think alike.
So I didn't that's a great idea. I was gonna turn on some music. I'm sharing sound, but I wouldn't want to share his music without permission.
I think we have permission.
All right.
Touche.
There he is. Hear that?
Yep, that's great. Hi, folks. I just want to invite everyone back in. We're going to slowly get back to the session. Hope everyone had a chance to take a quick stretch or grab a snack or some water. As we're all hopping back in, I just want to thank Zach one more time again for the fantastic presentation. It was so great to hear from you about not only your own work, but the history and the context and the technique behind it. So thank you once again. As we switch kind of to getting started now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who I have obviously, or maybe you don't know, I'm incredibly biased because this is one of my all-time favorite human beings on the planet. One of my favorite mentors and artistic and otherwise personal. We have Wiliam Tate joining us today. And there's a lot I could say about Wiliam Tate. He's, of course, a professor of architecture. He teaches architecture and design at James Madison University. He also is, as he likes to describe it, a direct descendant of the Bauhaus mind. And he has an exceptional background working with some of the greatest architects in recent history, and is simply an incredible visionary for what education can be, what architecture can be, and facilitates amazing opportunities for young people to experience all that he has to offer through trips to Vienna, trips to Krakow. I owe my own experience of really meeting Poland and getting to know Krakow and transitioning my life here thanks to him and the trip that he does called Studio Krakow. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the virtual floor to Tate.
Deal. Thank you. Joanna, that was such a sweetheart introduction. Thank you. And I'm really honored to be part of this solidarity project. As soon as Joanna wrote me, I said yes before I finished the email. And it's just, you know, this venue is just a chance to kind of step out of your bounds, you know, and to take a risk and even find new fields. And it was really great, Zach, to be on with you. I learned a lot through your talk, and I've got a lot of notes. So, so look, you know, if you don't know me, with these talks, we just left shore. Okay, we're on this journey now, and yeah, I want to start with an image here. I've got a thesis studio at JMU right now, and it's 16 seniors, and we're into our last week. And one of the things we did was everyone made a rubber stamp. You had to make a 2-inch by 2-inch rubber stamp. So when you do a rubber stamp, it becomes symbolic, and it really reduces down to the essence. You start to find this icon, and then you have this artifact that I'm sure they'll use for the rest of their lives. It's always this moment, you know. But the funny thing I'm doing right now is it's a very funny start, but I want to offer you a job. So we have a 1-year position in architecture, and it got approved really late. And so there's the link. Just if you're interested, if you'd like to come to Virginia for a year and play with us, Zach, maybe that's the interlude. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I figured this was a very receptive group, and I don't know who might need to do this, but yeah, we can send this link. Joanna can get it. Okay, so here's where I'm going to start, and I want to start with a story. And the story is from the book of 2 Samuel, and it's about King David, the psalmist. Again, the Philistines invaded and deployed in the valley of the Rephaim. David consulted Yahweh, who replied, "Do not attack them from the front. Go around to their rear and engage them opposite the balsam trees. When you hear the sound of footsteps in the tops of the balsam trees, advance, for that will be Yahweh going out ahead of you to defeat the Philistine army." David did as Yahweh had ordered and beat the Philistines from Gibeon to the pass of Gezer. I'm reading that story to you because I have realized in doing this talk, it's a story I carry around with me, but I realize that's what I do. That's my core. I live and exist out of being in those balsam trees and trying to hear those footsteps. And it's in my work, and it's in my teaching, and it's in my learning, and it's something I try to pass on to everyone around me, you know? And I feel like with this talk, I hope I can just get us into the woods, into the woods. I also do not attack them from the front, go around to their rear and engage them opposite the balsam trees. There's a subversive move there. You don't do the obvious, you know, and that's hitting me right now. And I think that's going to come into play later in the talk. You're going to hear that kind of thinking, okay? But it's really interesting, gang. I've never shared this with anybody. And I don't know if I even realized it until I started working on this talk. And it's just one of those intuitive calls. Now, in this photograph, these are not balsam trees, you know, but these are really good trees. This is the essence of a tree. This is a wonderful photograph by Henri Cartier-Bresson. Yeah. So that's a start. So yeah, we have this little guerrilla studio called Umbao. And Umbao is this thing, and it vacillates between being a classroom and being a studio and being a workshop. And we respond to the needs and we emerge as we need to. But here's the mission statement. The mission statement is build Puccini. And we've had that for years, and I dearly love that mission statement. So with Puccini, when you listen to those Italian operas, you know, what you hear is the beautiful. You hear it's timeless music. It's emotional. It's sensuous. It's romantic. So if we can realize that in our built environment and in our world of architecture, the world is a better place. And then the idea of to build can be, yes, literally construction, but build is a much more multi-layered word to me. So it can be to assemble, it can be to make, it can be to write, it can be to sing, you know, all these kinds of acts. So the build Puccini just sums up this sort of Umbao mind. And then, Zach, I put this one in for you. When we go to Vienna, so we do 5 weeks in Vienna, Austria, and I have found this violin maker named Kai von Stetenkron, and this is his workshop. And Kai, it's one of the most spiritual experiences of the 5 weeks when we go and sit with Kai. And Zach, I know you know this, but Kai, so he's forming every part. And with Kai, if he shaves, if he sands, if he cuts, if he touches, he's always listening to the wood. He's always on the hunt for the acoustic property of that material. And it is like, it's just so amazingly powerful. So when we leave Kai's studio, you know, and he'll walk us through the process, and then he'll play something for us. When we leave Kai's studio, we touch things differently. We're changed, you know. You don't touch a doorknob. You don't pick up a pencil. the way you did before we went to cause. Okay, so look, what I'm wanting to do is this talk, I want to do 2 forks, like forks in a road, and then I got to hit a denouement. Okay, so I always feel like I'm a scout for y'all. And so I found this book, The Future of Universities Thought Book. And there's a North American version, there's a European version, there's a global version, and there's a 4th one I can't remember. Well, I ordered the North American one. I thought, well, what are they thinking about for us, you know? So what they're doing, it's 40 people thinking about higher education, looking at 2040. So guys, I'm after 2040. You know, I'm not after now. I am after now. Now gets to there. But I'm after 2040, and it's like I just want to. I'm synthesizing. I'm compressing some of the findings of what they're saying because, well, here's a reading of now. Current university systems operate in a model that often requires students to stop their lives, attend university, and then go out into the world by applying the learning. And the writer, I see this model as being insufficient by 2040. You know, so does this hit home? Is this where we are? And then if this isn't sufficient for 2040, what do we do? That's a big question. And I think, you know, I'm focusing on education and learning and interfering with the world, but I think it applies to many things. You know, so these writers, and again, I'm paraphrasing and just plucking fruit for you all, but they use words like, oh, they see educational models and the literary canons not as inevitable fixtures, but as movable objects. They're malleable. They use words like frame shift. They're real big on this idea of teaching entrepreneurship. They really emphasize collaboration, getting rid of borders. They emphasize learning how to do startups. And, you know, with the Umbau world, we've always been about that. That's part of why we're sort of guerrilla-like, is that we're trying to break with the status quo. So and this word, they use this word disruptive. You know, we need to be disruptive. And they say, reimagine a university without walls. Reimagine a university with walls. And they really start talking about, it's not going to be, the future is not so much about degrees, it's about competencies. And they also see that learning experience as being lifelong, so that you keep returning. You know, it's not this done deal. Listen to this. The most complex problems facing humanity today, for example, climate change, human migration, and threats to democracy, are too vast and interconnected to be solved by government or private sector action alone. They require long-term thinking and near-term investments of time, resources, and intellectual rigor. That they summed it up right there. This is our agenda. You know, our education, it's not to get a job. We have to really impact the world, you know? And that list, climate change, human migration, and threats to democracy, is honest. And it's a thing we're going to be working with for a while. I'm just changing slides for you. This is the work of Nicole Solnikov. And Nicole is this wonderful person. She's been to Vienna with us. She's done Krakow like 3 times. And right now she's in Basel, Switzerland, doing a graduate degree in visual communication. Somehow her work is symbolic of what I'm talking about, okay? And then I think you'll love this. We need future leaders who are capable of recognizing where entire systems of organization are failing, where the underlying principles are wrong or obsolete. We need to give our students the tools both to improve what exists and to imagine something wholly new. So, oh, they're real big, you all. They're really big on imagination and creativity. They really stress that. People who challenge the status quo through a combination of curiosity, collaboration, and action will shape the future of our world. I think you'll love this. This is a little bit of a tangent. Research suggests that people with highly active default networks or daydreaming states, the ability to let the mind roam, tend to also exhibit extraordinary insights. In other words, it is not enough to simply know a lot of facts. We must also have enough robust brain activity to draw new connections among those facts. Innovations live at the intersection of previously unassociated ideas. I may be reading too much. It may be getting thick, but they say it so well, you know? So we're the ones that need to make the change. You know, we don't rely on anyone. We become. Tadao Ando, this wonderful Japanese architect, talks about becoming a wedge in circumstances. A wedge in circumstances. And it's, I think you're getting my drift. It's a redefinition. It's not eliminating the university, you know, but it's thinking of other roles, other definitions, more hybridity, and stressing creativity. This image is just a recent talk I gave on tactile drawing. You know, I had the screenshot on my computer and I said, this looks dense enough. Funny story. When you drive up to JMU now, and you get off on this exit on the interstate, there's this big billboard. And I don't remember, I've been wanting to take a photograph of it, but of course I'm in this car. And it says something like JMU, Virginia's top university in job placement. That's the billboard, something to that effect. Like we're the best at doing this. And I love it when I'm in history of design or history of modern architecture. You know what I tell them? I tell them, don't get a job. Don't get a job. And then I really like that to just settle in so they can tell their parents. Tate said, don't get a job. The thing is, if the objective is to get a job, then you're fitting. You're fitting in what exists. We're out of time for fitters. We need the radical. We need the new. That's why I think this emphasis these writers had on entrepreneurship and startups. We need things that are unimagined, you know? There's a wonderful book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. This is the table of contents. And man, I saw this table of contents, and this is what we need to learn. Isn't it wonderful? I mean, everyone is thinking pivot. We use that a lot now, but these are the operational words of, I think, what we need to be learning. And if I take that and put it through an Umbau filter, we come up with a list like this. And you know, when you think about learning architecture or teaching architecture or becoming an architect, there is a professionalism to that word and to that category, and deservedly so. And so, but it can get territorial. So we've come up with this idea of it, we've renamed it. And so we make landers, and landers are kind of this healer prophet. But look, there's this list. And this is just ideas of what we're after, you know? And I would really invite you just to read this list and just get one that speaks to you and just put it in your heart and just walk with it. I do, when the next time I show this list from Zach, I'm going to add throwing crunch and fuzz. I think that's a completely legitimate lander activity. Okay, so let me keep going. We cool? This is my other fork. In my peregrinations to Krakow, I absolutely love Krakow. I've picked up these two books on different trips. So on the left, it's a history of graphic design in Poland, and on the right, it's a history of poster design. And there's a lot of overlap. And when you open the page, you got Polish in black, you got red in English. Okay. And so I love these books. And so what I'm learning from these books is this is the work of Henryk Tomaszewski. In Poland, in the teaching of the poster, I'm going to focus on poster. In the teaching of the poster, the entire 20th century, the Poles realized they had a legacy and it mattered who they passed it on to. So they cultivated who's going to be my assistant, who's going to teach with me, where are my students going to go? And so it was very contagious, but it was familial. It was not bureaucratic, you know, or if the bureaucracy tried to get in on them, the poster people and the graphic designers resisted it. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from my red book. So this is Tomaszewski. In my studio, I want to develop in my students logical and consistent thinking related to the function of the design tackled. I set the subject, and the students should rid it of the superfluous by way of analysis, whereby to arrive at abbreviation, at a sign. What Tomaszewski is emphasizing, he's emphasizing thinking. He wants them to think. I enforce asceticism on them, and I set severity of workmanship above flourish. I am anxious to make my students formulate their message in a personal way. I want them to be bold and independent in their vision. I want them to be explorers. So Tomaszewski was this incredibly charismatic figure. They say that he would, during class, they were highly exciting classes, and he went into long monologues about the current tasks he had set for them. But what happened is he started teaching for decades. He was establishing this new eye, and the Poles knew they were unique. They were the best. And this was in hard times. This was under communist rule, you know? They didn't have a lot of resources. So that's why Tomaszewski was so inventive. But listen, there are words like, just listen to some of this. Professor Tomaszewski's studio was taken over after his retirement by Professor Julian Palka. In turn, the latter studio was committed to the care of Assistant Professor Wasilewski, who had obtained an honors degree in Tomaszewski's studio in 1966. In 1971, his supervisor invited him to become an assistant in his studio. The studio of typography was turned over to Assistant Professor Lech Majewska. They talked about that with Tomaszewski, the lessons from his studio were grafted on to the next group, grafted. So did you hear that? The latter studio was committed to the care of. Hear that almost maternal legacy? Isn't that beautiful? This is not how Americans think. I think this is out of our taste, you know? The supervisor invited him to become. The typography was turned over. There is a real sense of stewardship, of being a good shepherd. And then I just want to say, it started with the French. This guy, Michel Coiret. See, Warsaw then becomes the poster magnet. And they come and study with Tomaszewski, and then they go back to France and they start this group called Grappus. And they radicalize posters and graphic design for all of France. And this happens over and over. So that's Tomaszewski, and that's Morszak on the right. And they're two central figures, but they're not alone. It was just across the board. The Poles, they were hitting on every cylinder, and it was for 100 years. And I'm not showing the artwork because it's not really an art lecture. It's more a pedagogical legacy talk. But I think the future people for 2040 are talking about redefining the university, but I think the polls give us a kind of touch and passing on that we need to reincorporate. So let me read one more thing of one of my friends. So this is Morszak, so it's the guy on the right. By the way, in doing this talk, I learned to type that Polish L, and I learned to do the Z with the dot. Isn't it wonderful? All right, this is Morszak. The condition of graphic design has no precedent in Poland as far as instruction is concerned. We have given up narrow specialization in favor of initiating our students into design of this type in a range as wide as possible. We guide them from the stage of analysis to that of synthesis through each of the graphic design procedures. Listen to this. We teach them to be versatile, flexible, and comprehensive in their approach. Here lies the essence of our revolution. See, I love those kind of words. Revolution. That's what we're needing, A lot of times it gets put in some sort of militaristic political mode, but I think it's a healthier word than that. So yeah, from me teaching history of design, from that teaching, I learned about Tomaszewski. And then Tomaszewski opens up this whole world. And then we start going to Krakow and we do a 2-week workshop, and we've done it. We did it for 4 summers. I hope we'll get back. Okay, I'm in denouement territory, and I want to address capacities. So this image is of a French architect, Jean Nouvel, in Paris, and I wanted to read a description of what he looks for in the qualities of a project head. Okay. The qualities required include autonomy, a head for organizing, and availability. Project heads have to be good technicians, know how to grasp a concept, however cerebral or elliptic, produce drawings that will regenerate thought and make suggestions. Physical resistance is also a prime requisite, along with ambition and humility, not to mention working hours that are hell and the constant rush. I think the futurists are talking about breeding people that can pivot and that can grasp a concept no matter how cerebral or elliptic. And I'm always after my guys to create generative drawings and models. You with me? But this is capacity. This is not technique. And then let me give you a parallel. This is an unusual parallel. Wonderful book, I highly recommend. No Rules, Rules. It's Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention. And so this is from the CEO. And what they're talking about is, they're talking about software engineers. So I just went from architecture to software engineers. And what they do is they're asking, do we get the really good ones or do we get the mediocre ones? And they talk about the really good ones. Okay. The great software engineer is incredibly creative and can see conceptual patterns that others cannot. She has an adjustable perspective. So when she gets stuck in a specific way of thinking, she has ways to push, pull, or prod herself to look beyond. These are the same skills needed in any creative job. See, I read that and I just go, amen. I just go, amen. And I hear exact reflection of Nouvelle. I hear exact reflection of Tomaszewski's Explorers and Moroshik's Call for a Revolution. You know? Okay. We're almost there. Spirite. But we got to go spiritual. And I'm reading from The Mist-Filled Path by Frank McGowan. And what he's talking about, and this is an ecological statement too. He's talking about our sensitivity to nature. And he met with this this Ojibwe man from Canada. And the guy was talking about the necessity of hunting or walking in nature with a soft gaze. A soft gaze. And here's the quote. The four-leggeds and the winged ones live in a different rhythm. There is the rhythm of soft eyes and soft feet. Two-leggeds have hard eyes and hard feet. When most humans go into the forest, they enter with so much of the world on them that any possibility of feeling the sacred is removed. When we go into the forest, we must become soft, like the animal people and the tree people. Like the animal people, we must become soft. And see, that's way bigger than sustainability or environmental design, which are automatic. But we're needing to like re-gear our whole approach, mode, sensitivity, and perceived need. Then, another one on capacity. The way of Buddhas and Zen masters is open as cosmic space, vast as the ocean. How can careless mediocrities tell of it? How can it be measured like feet and inches or calculated like thatch? Only those of great faculties, great capacity, and great power, exerting great intensity, stomp right through where not a single thought has arisen, not a single bubble has emerged. Only then do they have a little bit of realization. Henri Cartier-Bresson, encore. And I'm framing this talk with 2 Samuel, and now I'm in the Song of Songs. And this is another phrase out of this wonderful book that is a real beacon to me. You who dwell in the gardens, my companions, listen for your voice, let me hear it. Haste away, my love, be like a gazelle, a young stag on the spice-laden mountains. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for letting me travel with you. I don't know where shore is right now.
Thank you so much. That was a very illuminating talk, and a very again multifaceted. I love how many side streets we can go down in these discussions. One question I kind of have, I saw a through line, and you used the word synthesis early on, and synthesizing, and that idea of imagine the university without walls, and then imagine the university with walls, and it made me think of that sort of Hegelian synthesis idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, so that the new is always born out of the old. And then you even used the word revolution, and that was fascinating to me because Marx, kind of following Hegel, talked about communist revolution being born out of capitalism. So my question is, how do you exercise in your own work that kind of new being born out of the old?
Oh, that's really beautiful. I think it's a way of life, and I think it's I always talk to my students about getting slung. And to get slung, you're thrown off balance. You're a bit discombobulated, and that can happen through reading a book. It can happen through a film. It can happen through music. It happens to me all the time in museums. You just get slung, and it brings you into this new realm. But also, Jack, with that question, and all this, reimagine the university. I also think it's a lot of trial and error, and a lot of iteration, and a little bit of this, a little bit of that, so to find our way. The trouble or the hazard is if we stay monochromatic, just same old, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you. And kind of like piggybacking off of that, your talk about 2040 and futures was very inspiring, I think. I mean, it's inspiring to think that far into the future and think about it as like a space of infinite possibility. And I think of Alicia Garza, who was one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. She is now the head of the Black Futures Lab, which is a project that has actually gone around the country and surveyed African Americans, asking them what they would like to see for their future. And I guess it's the biggest survey that's ever been conducted with the African American community, or some maybe not the biggest, but somewhere in that vicinity. And what she found in asking those questions and in hearing people's answers is that the answers to those questions from these African Americans who in the United States are largely marginalized and oppressed, that the realization of those futures benefits everyone. So that there is a sense in which when you imagine far into the future and you don't let the present have any bearing on what it is you are imagining, you kind of exist in a prophetic imagination, in a way that you're imagining another kind of being. And I like that you opened with Samuel, and Samuel also being a prophet, and that the point being seeing something into the future which is quite other. And then you used the word bureaucratic. You said this is not bureaucratic. So can you expound on the way in which that kind of prophetic imagination conflicts with bureaucracy, and how we might maybe start overcoming that impediment?
Oh yeah, it's an ongoing question. I think the bureaucratic just so often gets bogged down in rules and justification and too many checkpoints. And that's why this Netflix book on No Rules, they're challenging questions of vacation. Like there's no vacation policy. There's no the thing of travel expenses and approval for purchases doesn't exist with Netflix. You're free to use your own initiative and judgment. And then that implies you're trusted, Now, with the prophetic, I think, Jack, it's one of those really ancient kind of Homo sapiens deep thing that we all carry within us, but we haven't worked the muscle. We've lost touch with it, and it's become dormant. It's almost like we don't even know the language or the pathway or how do you transition into that. But I know with the Native Americans, they talk about whatever you do, it's got to be good for 6 generations. You know, that's what the one I've always heard. And I think that's kind of a long view that we need to make more a part of our cycles and lives. And one thing I wanted to mention that I forgot, I really think the thing I was talking about with the Polish poster designers is miraculous. It is miraculous how these people worked and looked after each other and stayed close knit and then impacted the world. But I did want to say, you know, like, man, this does not happen in the United States. But where I have seen it happen elsewhere is with dance companies and with theater companies. Both of those groups are also really good at shepherding the legacy. I get chills just talking about this. But for instance, like the Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg, I mean, you want to talk ballet? Golly.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a question in the chat, and then Zach also wants to ask a question, but first we'll start with Debbie. She thought she heard you use the phrase soft gaze earlier in the story about the Ojibwe man. What do you think it means for a modern artist to have a soft gaze when the existing in the world is often so hard and it's so easy to become cynical?
Yeah, I know. There's an alternative. It's to become aware that there's an alternative, and to just maybe where you start to go hard, go gentle, and it can happen with just walking. It can just happen with you becoming conscious of your feet touching the ground. When I go to these monasteries, and I'll go for like 5 days, and I find I slow down. I find that I really don't need to talk. And I find that I become very aware of how my feet touch the ground, shoes or no shoes, you know? And I want to mention a couple days ago, I was waking up and I was thinking of all the problems, you know? We're coming off a horrendous 4 years. We've had horrible things happen in this country, you know? And I was thinking, oh, it's so hard, it's so hard. And then I don't know, I hit a switch that day and I said, I think the change has already started. You know, I think we're on our way. I think we're building momentum. And it's like, golly, it was like so freeing to just hit that switch. And I wasn't, you know, I wasn't suffering from angst, you know, but it was like, I don't know, it was just a different kind of filter.
Thank you for that. Zach, what would you like to ask Professor Tate?
Sure. Well, first I want to thank you for your talk. It was really illuminating in a lot of different ways. You talk both pretty simultaneously about disruption, revolution, and sort of this massive shift that needs to happen in the next generation or two. And at the same time, you talk a lot about shepherding and carrying forth the good parts of tradition. One company that I think of like in terms of disruption is Uber, where they've not only undermined like the entire taxi industry in a lot of markets, but then also started to cannibalize their own workforce and put people, not only their drivers, but also passengers in very precarious positions. So I want to know, like, you kind of touched on this already, talking about performance troupes and dance troupes, dance companies. What's the element that you think prevents revolution from tipping into just destruction and outright chaos? Is it that the group dynamic? Is it multi-generational sort of passing along of talent? Is there something intangible that happens in those spaces that you think preserves the sort of goodwill and altruism? So yeah.
I guess it, Zach, great thoughts. I mean, help me think. Does it come back to core principles and beliefs that you can reside on? For instance, with the civil rights movement back in the 60s, they were trained all the marchers and protesters were trained in nonviolence. And they would go to this camp in Tennessee, I forget the name of it, and they were subjected to abuse, you know, and cursing and just all the hard things. And you have to learn not to hit back. And you know, it was a Gandhian principle, but it's like, I guess it goes back to those core beliefs and what can you really hold to? Because, you know, then, you know, within the nonviolent movement that Dr. King was so committed to, then the Black Panthers came along in Oakland and they thought, well, no, it's not getting us anywhere or enough. And we just got to look after our neighborhoods, you know, so they got more militant. Hey, Jack, back to your other bureaucratic question. And I love this idea of renewal, you know, and to just renewal. And it's very interesting biblically. See, I think the Pharisees got consumed by the rules. And here comes this Messiah-like figure, and they just couldn't take it. You know, he was kind of in their face, you know, saying, you guys are a bunch of hypocrites, you know? And so you have the holy scrupulosity bunch, and then you have this like this new wine coming in, and it was quite revolutionary.
Thank you. It's been a great discussion, and in fact, Zach, what the exchange you two just had made me think of your taking apart the double neck guitar, and the plan is to put it back together, but you're kind of waiting for that right moment and that like inspiration and like the time to kind of open up, and that made me think of there's a rapper, MF Doom, who died recently, and one of his lines, he's often held up the image of the villain, because in the United States and in the world at large, Black people are often held up to be these villains, and so he adopts the image of the villain to kind of undermine its effect, you know, undermine its offense, and he says a supervillain who in his vocabulary is a good, this is a virtuous model. A supervillain is well skilled in destruction as well as building. So the interplay of what do you have to destroy in order to make way for the new, you know, so that maybe it's not just about you know, holding on to principles and hoping for the best, but also maybe sometimes you do have to go, okay, this isn't working, we need to defend our communities, you know. So like what's the push and pull look like, and how do we engage in a creative destruction toward a better world? So I think it's really wonderful that we're asking these questions in the artistic frame and in the educational space and in architecture, reimagining reality from the top down, and as you said, like imagining what we want for 2040. So thank you so much for this discussion. If anyone else has any questions, you can raise your hand or put a question in the chat. I just have one more. It's a kind of a more personal question. It seems that Vienna and Krakow and Shenandoah all play an important part in your work, and I just wonder if you could speak to a moment to how those cities inform your sense of vocation.
Okay. Vienna, is just this incredible city, and as soon as I touch the ground there, I'm at home. I'm really at home, and we've got a good base of operations. And I this is going to sound scary, but I practice this art of what I call stalking. It's how I meet all these great designers, and like this is how I met Kai. And you're just what I mean is you find them, you have to discover them, and then you persistently try to pursue, and they're so welcoming, you know? And so I really have, I don't know, I change when I'm in Vienna. I think I'm much more monk-like here in Virginia, except with my students. And then in Vienna, it's like I need to network with the entire city, you know? And somehow it just flows. And so I can say in Vienna, I have really a dense group of very good friends who are also these incredible shoemakers or architects or whatever. And the thing I wanted to mention about Krakow is that I'm so impressed. The Polish people, there's just this gentleness and this humility about them. And I receive that from them as I walk on the streets. Vienna is this place that's very elegant and sophisticated, you know, and Krakow has this sweetheart, kind of worn down humility about her, you know? And I mean, we go into Krakow and we just have to build everything, you know, from where we're going to, you know, do the screens, to burn the screens. And then we try to find, in 2 weeks, we have to find a place to do an exhibition. And Krakow, this city opens her heart to us. Here are these strange Americans, you know, this little squad. And every year we have had a good place to do an exhibition, and it's in galleries, or it's in a warehouse, or it's in a, you know, it's just incredible how Krakow thrives on improvisation. At JMU, I couldn't schedule an exhibition until like 2022. They're so bloody booked up. Hello, bureaucracy. There's just this spontaneity and freedom in Krakow that is unbelievable, unbelievable. I'm a native Virginian, so I love the Blue Ridge Mountains. We live in a town called Stanton, and it's in what they call the Shenandoah Valley. And Shenandoah is Native American for daughter of the stars. You know, so it's just Stanton is a little town. I always say Stanton is the nearest Italian hill town. It is so beautiful, and it hadn't been destroyed like so much of America does. And then with a small townness, it's easy to get around. I mean, you can park in front of where you want to eat, you know, on the street. It's very livable. Oh my God, we feel blessed. So I'm really thankful for these geographies. I am on the hunt, though, I must say, for things in North Africa, which is a little scary, but you have to keep molting, you know?
Well, thank you so much. That we are past time, so I do want to acknowledge that, but it's only because we have had two wonderful panelists and some great discussion. So thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to all of our participants. Thank you, our director, Joanna, and thank you to the U.S. Embassy in Poland for making this event possible. You can let us know how your experience was in the survey in the chat, and there are also, you can also subscribe to future event announcements. I'll reshare that link. And if you get the emails, look out for the next one. We'll have another panel for you in 1 month on the last Saturday of May. And I believe that's May 29th. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And Joanna, do you want to say any last words before we finish?
Sure, yeah. I just posted one more link. We're working on a virtual platform to have the virtual exhibition at the end of the grant period, which will be in October of 2021. So in the meantime, the hub of all the information is on my website. I just posted a link. So that has links to the Instagram, YouTube page where all the recordings will be posted. And it links to the email announcements. So feel free to subscribe, let us know. I think we have one more thought from Tate, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, Bless you, Joanna.
Oh, okay. So
Hannah?
anyway, I want to thank you all so much for being here. It's such a pleasure, and I'm coming to you from Krakow on a very cloudy day, and y'all have made it very sunny from where I'm sitting. So thank you so much, and hope to see you next time. Let us know what you think, and see you soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And actually, if the speakers could the speakers stay on for a minute? And if any of the project participants are still here, we'd love to just have a minute with you. So thank you all so much, and see you next time.
And I also see former students, current students, and people from the Studio Krakow, and it's just so great to have you all here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming, everyone.
Can I tell Zach my story?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, please.
Zach, I want to tell you that so Kai has this little workshop, and it's on the one floor up, and it's in this really quiet courtyard that's owned actually by a monastery outside Vienna. But anyway, he does this thing where there's this last finish that he does, and he's strung it, and it's when he first plays on that violin.
Yeah.
And by the way, he does violins, violas, and cellos. And he says he always does it at night, so no one's around and no one's coming by, and it's extra quiet. And it's this religious experience. And he says when he this new violin that he spent 4 or 6 months building, and when he does that violin, he says it's just like giving birth.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that I mentioned really briefly is that like the new instrument always has a way of surprising you. When you spend that much time working on it, you create sort of a character in your head, and you have this expectation of like, well, it looks a certain way, guitars that look like that, certain, or instruments that look like this sound a certain way, or you think you've gotten to know it so well, and then the first time a note comes out of it, you're like, oh yeah, it's its own thing, and you realize it exists outside of yourself and outside of anyone else as its own like autonomous thing that it's magic. And I think like it's amazing how the finished instrument is so much more than the sum of its parts, especially with acoustic instruments, it's just wood and resin, and then the strings. The guitar, you have the benefit of being able to run it through an amp and run it through all these effects and things that'll further enhance how it sounds. But an acoustic instrument has that much more of its own aura, I think, too.
And Zach, from looking at your painting of the guitars, I really think you would enjoy silkscreen.
Oh yeah, I could see that. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was thinking that so much when you were showing us. Like, honestly, I think your work would translate so seamlessly to screen printing. So definitely, sometimes there's some studios or places in different cities, like Richmond, there's one called Studio 234, where people can go and learn how to screen print. Now it might be a little bit hit or miss what's available, but definitely consider that. And whenever there's Studio Krakow again, it's not an if, it's a when, I believe. I think you would be I'm very biased, obviously, but I think you'd be a great participant with that. It's such a great experience.
Yeah, thank you. That's something that's definitely crossed my mind before, but encouraging, I guess.
Zach,
and Joanna, I've seen some of your work on your site and everything. And if you ever wanted to collab on an instrument together, I would absolutely love that. I think you do some really cool stuff with it. And
oh my gosh. So seriously, I would love that. I would definitely like hit you up about that. I'm actually working on an installation series, and I'm trying to juxtapose music and sound against it. So cool. I will definitely be reaching out. You might regret that, actually, but I'm going to hold you to it.
I doubt it, but let's try me.
I texted her that the Splattermaster was a Joanna guitar.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt. I got that abstract expressionist feeling like always in my work and in my heart.
It was funny, the other night I made a pizza with a bunch of like weird ingredients that normally aren't on pizza, like barbecue sauce and cauliflower and onions and bell peppers and stuff like that. And when I had everything on it, and then I grated the mozzarella cheese over the pizza, and when I looked at it, it had like, it looked like a Jackson Pollock painting.
Yeah.
And I was like, it doesn't look very appetizing, but it looks very artistic.
Right, right.
So good.
But,
Oh my gosh.
but Zach, there one question I didn't get to ask you, which I was like, okay, we're running out of time. I don't necessarily want to bore people if they're not interested in guitar pedals. But you mentioned, running amplifying the guitar sound not just through, an amplifier, but also through effects pedals. And I was wondering if what your philosophy of guitar pedals is, and like how you kind of conceptualize that in your relationship with your guitars.
Yeah, so for me, the pedals are another instrument to play. So it's not like, a lot of people will say like, oh, less is more. The guitar should have a nice enough sound, and then you kind of only want to tweak it and augment it to the extent that it needs, to be projected through the mix or whatever. For me, I could listen to like a guitar run through reverb, and to me, the sound of the reverb, or the sound of whatever else is happening around the original note that comes through it, is as interesting as the line of music that's being played itself. So I kind of like on the song that I released, there's that noise track that kind of comes in and out of the mix, and it moves throughout the left and right channels, and it gets louder and softer. It's distortion, it's a little bit of overdrive, but it's mostly reverb, and it's the sound sort of supposed to like mimic echoing through a big room. It'd be a lot cooler if I was in a big enough room to actually make that happen. But yeah, you can add so much character to the sound that comes out of the instrument that it becomes its own thing. So I think a lot of bands like in the 90s, this started happening a lot with like Sonic Youth, kind of is known for like playing the feedback and playing the room more than they play the actual instruments. My Bloody Valentine is like kind of back in style now, but they're like, the whole shoegaze movement is like really much more about playing the pedals than playing the guitars themselves. You play this very simple kind of, you just strum a chord and then modulate it and warp it and push and pull it through all those different pedals. My board right now though is very, very straightforward. Like I have a tuner, I have an octave pedal that you can do other like intervals, and then it's just overdrive, distortion, chorus, reverb, delay, like a joint like 2-in-1 reverb delay, and then like a phaser, the phase 90, that's just like a kind of oscillating like back and forth. But if you stack them on top of each other and you really get very maximalistic with like what you do to the signal, it comes out sounding like something that you're not even putting into the guitar. And then again, like when you have a hollow body or semi-hollow, it comes out of the amp and then the guitar catches the sound again and it puts it back through all over again. And you're not even really playing music at that point. You're just kind of recycling and washing out this noise over and over, where it kind of, it transfigures it into something that's separate from what it started out as. So I don't know, it's like magical to me. I could sit in my room and loop spacey stuff on myself, like on my own, like forever. So
yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, in the history of pedals, like they serve a very like they do provide the edge for a lot of rock and roll guitarists. I mean, you have distortion. I mean, Sister Rosetta Tharpe used distortion, as you said. But I remember hearing one music commentator say that when he saw Jimi Hendrix play, and Jimi Hendrix was famous for turning the distortion all the way up and the sustain all the way up, so that like this distortion pedal was just pushed as far as it possibly could in a way that nobody had thought to like use it in that way. And when he was responding to it, not just playing what he would normally play, but also trying to make noises with the guitar to get the guitar to produce these unheard of sounds. I heard this commentator say, you were watching him play the music, but you had no idea how he was producing the sounds he was producing. And
right.
sure that like the magical quality of guitar pedals.
Yeah, I mean, I use the word transfiguration in the most like sacramental terms possible, because it is like out of nothing something new comes, you know. And you can scientifically explain how you get like that, but it, again, like you watch someone play this music and you're like, I don't know where that sound is coming from, you know. Hendrix is a really good example of that. They'd say, like, you know, he'd play at Cafe Wah and you'd be able to hear him 2-3 blocks away, like in Washington Square Park, because the sound would just travel in such a way. But yeah, it's like this paradigm shift. And, you know, Tate, you're saying like there's this revolution that happens when it comes out of the thing that happened before it. So the technology wasn't totally new, but it just came in a shift in like thinking of what good music could be. You know, when you're classically trained, you're thinking like you want the notes to be clean, you want it to be articulated really well, you want it, you know, if you're playing in an ensemble, you want it to cut through and you want presence. And then Hendrix said, like, no, all this other stuff that comes over the top that you're supposed to eliminate, what if that itself becomes the note that becomes the music that you want to hear? So it's as much a break in the thinking about what you can do as it is in the style or technique or the technology even. I don't know. I could talk about this for days. So
I so appreciate, I just have to say, as someone who isn't familiar with so much of what you're talking about, I love that you make it very accessible and very, I don't know, very clear for someone who doesn't understand some of the, you know, technology or techniques that go behind all of what you do. And same with Tate, of course, like he makes something like architecture, which is so beautifully complex and nuanced, something that feels like anyone can kind of, you know, become interested in and investigate and consider implementing in some form or fashion into their own lives or their own work. So thank you for that.
well, thank you.
Zach, I really enjoyed your list you had at the end of what you lessons and what you were finding and steps, those kinds of things. And I'm sitting here thinking you might have a book in you.
That'd be a good project to work on. I mean, if there's I had no idea that even 10 people would want to listen to me talk about this. So who knows? You know, I'm just glad to have the opportunity to talk about it and that people are interested. So perhaps.
Oh, absolutely. There's like no doubt in there. And yeah, we've had like so many people like checking that like we're recording it, they can go back and watch it. And I've even had private messages here of people saying, oh my gosh, I could listen to these speakers all day. I just like want to have them in the background, like when I'm doing other things. So I'm just so grateful. Thank you to both of you once again for your time and your energy and for, you know, learning with us and about all these amazing topics.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wonderful opportunity.
And
it was really, I really appreciated the pairing.
Yeah, I think it worked really well. And we like both ended up talking about, you know, spirituality in a lot of ways. So that was a nice tie-in.
A nice surprise, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something, I don't know, I'm starting to kind of consider myself like, I'm trying to find a word that encompasses what I do, because I do all these different things. So something I've been trying to think about is like how like visual storytelling or curating different narratives together is something I'm really interested in, and finding some unique pairings that would never have probably crossed paths before, and putting them together and seeing just how much fusion and like beautiful enmeshment like comes from that, from these either different media or different people. So I'm so excited that this project has so much potential to like enrich so much of what we can know about these different topics and ways of making and ways of thinking. I wanted to share a couple more comments I just got personally. Somebody was asking once again about the about your work, Zach, and about Tate's work. And I had already put some of the links in the chat for that, for Zach's music and for the Umbau website. But if there's any other things that you would suggest for people to know more about you or your work, let us know, and I'll include that with the recording info and like a follow-up email. So just have that in mind, I guess, with if there's anything else that you'd like people to know or to be able to get in contact with you or get in touch.
Yeah, Jack mentioned I have an MA in religion, so that's surprisingly relevant. I didn't include that in the bio, but we ended up using a lot of that today. So yeah, I mean, I don't have social media. I try to stay off. So
right, actually, that was something I wanted to bring up earlier, and we just didn't have time. But I loved the connection that both of you are just so off the grid, and that's such a like unusual thing these days. But I think that's so fantastic. So actually, I don't know. I mean, I know we're way past the time, so people can feel free to head on out when they need to. But I don't know. I'd be curious to have you both talk about that for a bit, or just what that experience has been, or how do you feel about it, or any thoughts?
I mean, I feel great right now. It's in a lot of ways it was like leaving a really unhealthy relationship. At the start of quarantine, I was on Twitter a lot. I was on Instagram a lot. I was probably spending like most of my day just like on social media, and so, like, even if I was doing something else in the background. So I deleted Twitter almost a year ago, and I deleted my Instagram like a little over a month ago, and both have been really freeing, and they've allowed me to be bored, which is a really healthy thing I think for any artist to do, is just like have time to be bored and to not do something, and that'll allow ideas to germinate. But I said on the site for my release that it was born out of like I forget the wording that I use, but it's like born out of like isolation, quarantine, and like fed by a steady diet of doom scrolling, where I don't know, just like the constant like barrage of bad news. Like nothing good happens on it. Like I don't know. You're not missing anything. Anything that important, you'll hear about. And you'll probably hear about it from somebody that you actually want to listen to instead of just having a notification on your phone. So I don't know, like read a book, get outside. That's a lot more healthy, I think. Also, I don't know, there's the whole other element of it being like a surveillance thing, and knowing how you think and what your emotional cycles are like, and targeting you and coercing your behavior in certain ways that I think is just like has this very flattening effect on people, where we become much more like each other because we're consuming the same media, we're being coerced in the same ways. And I don't know, I'm still very American in that I pride myself on like a modicum of individuality and uniqueness, and I think we all ought to, because that's what makes the world interesting. So the less time we spend becoming the same hive mind, I think the more potential there is for interesting things to happen.
I think with me, I'm just aware it can become such a compulsive habit. And I find that, can I walk by on my phone and not check it? And how you have to check it. And it's like, I don't even carry my phone all the time with me, and I feel almost unpatriotic. It's like, but it's like, I think it's extremely distracting. I think it's incredibly powerful. It has, you can find out anything, you can do things globally. I mean, so there's definite power to take advantage of, but I don't know. I keep my distance. Some of it could be just laziness. I don't want to learn that. That's just not what I want to think about, It was so funny. We're doing this virtual exhibit on Monday of our thesis studio. And my whole thought was, gosh, we want the parents to come. We just want it to be open. And this one guy was saying, my parents can't do Zoom. most of the reasons where they were at work, they would be working then, but yeah, no, they can't do Zoom.
Yeah. The flip side of that, of course, is like you have toddlers being raised on iPads, so there's this whole generation coming in that doesn't know a world without it, and that takes these algorithms, not just being on the internet, but being shown information by these algorithms, that becomes the world that they inhabit, that becomes the water that they're swimming in. So I don't know, for me as somebody who was like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of being a digital native, I grew up like when America Online was still sending like 40 hours of free internet in the mail on a CD-ROM. Like that's when I started coming onto the internet. I don't want that to totally disappear where there's a world outside of it, but I understand that the two are becoming even more enmeshed right now. So
it's so funny. I remember a while back, one of our granddaughters, and she must have been like 1 or something, and she picked up a photograph and she was trying to swipe it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a little, yeah.
A few years ago, I went out to dinner with my dad, and my dad is very bougie, very affluent, and he was dating someone at the time who had a little girl, and she was adorable. I mean, she was just one of those little girls that like everything she said, you wanted to film it and put it on Instagram and get like 1 million followers, like that kind of, because it was just it was so adorable. And we're at dinner and I see him like pulling out all this technology, right? They're like pulling out like these huge headphones, noise canceling headphones. And then they pull out the big iPad, and then they pull out the iPad stand, and then they set it in front of her. And this little girl, like 4 years old, is wearing these huge noise canceling headphones and staring into the iPad. And my dad's like, and then we just don't have to worry about her anymore. Like she's gone. And she literally was just in the zone the entire dinner. Like, and it's like, it's like I sent her to boarding school for the dinner, like, and I just was so offended by that. That was so like disgusting to me that I had never seen anything like that at a dinner table before. And here I am like sitting with the person who like taught me what a dinner table looks like, so yeah. So I mean, I think you're right that like we want to be imaginative, as we've talked about. We want to like adapt to the future and think of new possibilities and create new forms. Like, what does guitar look like in a digital frame? But and I think the guitar is a very good example of this. We don't want to lose that physicality and that physical intimacy and that like physical connection that we make with human beings and with the earth and with like these and with sacred objects, and like holding on to that idea of the sacred and not just making everything profane and digital. But I mean, and there's my dichotomy, right? Like I'm probably like an analog heavy character, but that at the same time I have a digital amp. I do all my own music digitally. I've never made anything on vinyl. I've never made anything on tape. It's like always been digital all the way down the line. So
yeah. And then by the same token, 50 years ago it was profane when Bob Dylan plugged in an electric guitar, because sacred was acoustic and profane was electric. So these dichotomies are constantly shifting and evolving over the generations.
Yeah, they were gonna axe the wires. There was a guy who grabbed an axe who was gonna chop the wires in half because he couldn't believe that they were desecrating the folk festival.
Exactly.
Electronic music.
Mm-hmm.
Zach, I have a former student and now a really good friend who lives in the area. And he's this guy who is like really, really specific and almost anal about surfaces and finishes. And he's done car work like with Ferraris. and all his he studied architecture, all his models, you know. But anyway, he loves to make guitars, and he does Eddie Van Halen's guitar.
That's cool.
And he studied
Yeah.
it. That he gets the cigarette burns.
Wow.
Because Eddie Van Halen, you know, would stick his
Yeah.
cigarette in there.
Oh
He had
yeah.
this brown ring where there was a burn. He's like that detail. It's
That's
a work of
wild.
art. It is a work of art.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a level that I could not accomplish right now. Like that's way over my head. But yeah, just I mean, the Van Halen guitar being this like sacred object to people. It's interesting. I was going to include a link, and obviously it got cut for time. When Eddie Van Halen died, his estate sold off, or I don't even think it was his estate. Just people sold, like auctioned off his guitars, and some of them went for like, you know, $100,000, couple $100,000 of his like Frankencaster custom guitars. It turns out he didn't ever touch two of them. They were just like made by his tech or whatever and given to people. One of them was a gift that he had given to somebody, and then they gave it to someone else and resold it, or they resold it themselves or whatever. So even though it's not this relic that, oh, he played it on this specific tour and he wrote this song on it or whatever, because of the proximity to the person just through style and design, like it still takes on that same significance.
Yeah.
But the specific, like the cigarette burn, like that's a detail that you're replicating like this person's touch and their presence in this totally different object, which is really cool.
You know, one of my favorite guitar stories is, and you mentioned, Zach, Black Sabbath at one point. I'm actually wearing my Black Sabbath t-shirt. Tony Iommi, the guitarist from Black Sabbath, he grew up in Birmingham, United Kingdom, and it was an extremely industrial environment where you could hear factory machines every single day of your life into the far hours of the morning, you know, so that the drummer is talking about laying in bed, not being able to sleep because he can hear like the banging of these, the clanking of these machines, and how that ends up informing what becomes heavy metal music. But one of the things that happens in this environment is when he's 17, Tony Iommi is working in a factory, and he's already established himself as a great guitarist in Birmingham, but he loses his fingertips when he has an accident at the factory. And they tell him he's never going to be able to play guitar again. And it's through creating like these like leather thimbles to attach to his fingertips that he's able to get to a place where he can start playing again, but he can only play with super light strings. And they were so light they hadn't been made, so he was literally taking banjo strings and using them as guitar strings so that he could get even lighter strings to play. And then on top of that, he had to develop techniques to play the guitar that wouldn't bother his fingers as much, because it would actually painfully hurt to play the guitar certain ways.
Yeah.
Through that, he develops this incredibly singular guitar sound, which determined and in fact forged the guitar sound of heavy metal for decades to come, you know. And so it's amazing to me the way that the context and the environment and the limitations are what push us into creativity and a kind of creative destruction, where we let go of the old and embrace the new in a decisive manner.
Yeah, that's really, I didn't know that story though. That's really cool. But I mean, I do think like just with the noise being a part of the environment, I think noise and the landscape like informs music wherever you go. I don't think it's an accident that like a lot of the independent music in New York right now is extremely noisy, because there's so much construction in the city. There's always car traffic. There's always sirens and car horns on the streets. And if you go to like an independent music venue there, you'll hear like noise acts and noise artists specifically, like, and then even like the punk is much noisier. There's a lot more feedback in that. Like, whereas like I have friends from Virginia who like mostly play acoustic instruments. They'll pick up a fiddle or they'll pick up an acoustic guitar, like in that area. Like they're from maybe a lot more like of a rural place. Like you can let an acoustic instrument sing a little bit more, and it's not going to be instantly drowned out. So it informs the thinking and the notion of like what musicality is a lot more. But yeah, there's a newsletter I subscribe to called Does It Doom, and this guy like does guitar videos, and he does lessons on how to play certain metal songs and like how to set up your pedal board in such a way as to get certain sounds out of it. And every newsletter he signs off, "In Iomi we trust." So yeah, this person still does carry this like mythological weight in metal.
And another classically SG
Yeah.
artist, like,
Yeah, absolutely.
had basically one guitar that he played for years and years and years. And the funny story even behind the guitar is one of the modifications he had to make is he was only able to find he's left-handed, and he was only able to find a right-handed guitar. So he converted the right-handed guitar into a left-handed guitar, just like Jimi Hendrix did. The funny thing was, on tour, he encountered someone who owned an SG who somehow could only find a left-handed SG
and set it up righty.
Incredibly more rare, and he set it up left. So at this concert, he meets this guy, and they agreed to swap SGs, and they literally
That's
just
wild. That's so funny.
And then he put a sticker on it, or some kind of decal on it, and now it's the famous Tony Iommi guitar, but it used to belong to this other guy who had converted the left-handed guitar into a right-handed guitar. So then it converted back in order to be played by Tony Iommi. It's really funny the stories behind these objects that are so much more larger than life than we tend to think they are.
Yeah, that's the thing, is they have a life of their own, and they travel autonomously.
Well, this has been a great discussion. Thank you again for the wonderful talk. I'm sure we could go on forever and ever, but we recognize people have other things and whatnot. But Joanna, any last words?
Just thank you. I was going to say, I think this discussion could just go on for infinity. So I guess we do have to call it a day at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.